Washington's added a whole bunch of names to its already star-studded list of visitors.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So, Lars, let's jump right into it today because there are so many official visitors that we need to talk about that have set official visits to Washington over the last 4 or 5 days, whatever it is, the last that we got a chance to talk recruiting because obviously the pro day and a couple other things kind of took priority in a sense, but now is, spring practice is going to be starting this week. We got to talk about visitors because there are going to be unofficial guys visiting throughout the month. There are going to be official visitors starting as soon as this coming weekend. So let's start with some of the biggest ones. And I really don't think there's any bigger name right now than 4-star wide receiver Andrew Marsh, where, Lars, you and I are both pretty plugged in on the recruiting trail with some of the guys that are visiting, some of the things that might be going on, as I'm sure we'll get into over the course of this. I don't think either of us saw Andrew Marsh scheduling an official visit to Washington. And this is a huge credit to Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff because he's rated as the number 66 player in the country by 247 Sports, a number 7 wide receiver. And getting a kid like that out of Texas to come up on a visit, he's got some other big-time visits scheduled, being Penn State, Texas, USC, and Oklahoma. So that's pretty tough competition. And just credit to Washington for being able to just stay in the mix for a guy like this. And with unlimited official visits now, you can say what you will, but this is just a testament to Jedd Fisch's coaching staff and everything they've done early on, just being able to say to a guy like this, hey, come on up, just let's show you what we have to offer, and we can go from there. And yeah, this is just a great start.
Yeah, well, not only Jedd Fisch, but let's give the guy the real flowers. It's Kevin Cummings, right? Because Kevin Cummings is going to be the one doing a lot of heavy lifting. Again, all credit at the end of the day goes to Jedd Fisch. It's his offense. He's the play caller. But when you're talking about the key recruiters on the staff, it's on offense with Kevin Cummings because I would have to imagine Scotty Graham is probably involved just at some level because he seems to be a guy that's, especially with some of their top targets, really a guy that just is a relationship builder and a bridge guy, a area recruiter across the country, if you will. But yeah, when you go into Katy, Texas and get a top 10 wide receiver in a class, like that's all you can ask for. Right now, again, they haven't gotten it by any stretch of the imagination, but when we talk about the receiver class, we talked about it, probably 2 weeks ago, where we said, here's 3 or 4 names, Cooper Perry, et cetera, Chris Lawson, right? That's still a pretty good class, but now the more you can get in on some of these other guys, then you're like, hey, well, maybe when Andrew Marsh gets up to Washington, he's like, wow, you know what? Actually, I didn't think I would like it as much as I do now. And now all of a sudden, now you're playing chess instead of checkers, and you have more pieces to work with. That's kind of the key here, because if you're just focusing on 3 or 4 guys, yeah, that might work. But we still, this is a bad example, but that 21 class or 20 class with Sawyer Racanelli, and I forgot the other 2 that were involved in that class, but Sawyer transferred out. So you can't just say, hey, these are the 3 guys we want. We're going to get them. And then look, I don't think any of those 3 guys, aside from Denzel Boston, are working out right now. And Denzel came in the class after Sawyer. So when you think
Denzel was a 22 class.
Right. And so when you think back to it, pigeonholing some of these guys or think, hey, we have to get this guy or this guy's a sure and lock. Okay, but he might not pan out. And so when you look at Andrew Marsh, no matter where he goes, that 6'1", 180, 185 probably can get up to, I would imagine, or so 170, probably can get up to 185. I would imagine that's what he would play at his freshman year in college. But either way, getting a guy with that type of skill set, that's your job as a recruiter for Kevin Cummings and as a head coach for Jedd Fisch. That's the type of talent you need on the offense. He said he kind of honestly gave a shout out to the last 3 coaches that were on Washington on Twitter, saying, "Hey, thank you to the last 3 coaches for recruiting this talent. We now have the standard to keep it up." And then, true, Jedd Fisch didn't recruit Rome, didn't recruit Jalen, didn't recruit Jalen Poole, but now
he's going. Sorry, I'm glad you mentioned those 2 guys. I have to stop you real fast because those were the other 2 guys in Sawyer Racanelli's class. It was Rome, Jalen, and Sawyer.
Okay, so, but that was kind of different because that was more of the Junior Adams era.
But it's still that same class, the 2020 class.
Right. So, okay, ironically, my point probably does get invalidated there. But the point of what I'm getting is you want to have more pieces on the puzzle because especially with the new class, Rome and those guys, I guess to your point, Jalen McMillan, when he got that offer from Washington, I want to say back in 2018 or 2019, from that day forward, I felt like he was coming to Washington. Even with the coaching changes and all that, it just seemed like his character and his personality fit at Washington. So when you start to cast a wider net in this 25 class, now you're starting to see, hey, maybe we could get a Jalen Polk, whereas otherwise we were just looking at a Sawyer or somebody on the West Coast. Hey, we can go get a Jalen Polk out of Texas. Let's go get a Jalen Polk out of Texas. Let's go get a Roma Dunes out of Vegas. Things like that.
And like to their credit, just with a guy like Andrew Marsh, and you could say the same thing about Phillip Bell, who also said his official visit as we kind of wrap up at wide receiver there, where they're aiming big. They're saying we're going to go get these highly rated guys and we're going to sell them on early playing time, especially at receiver, where that's one thing where, you know, you're going to have to get probably 3 guys, in my opinion, in this 2025 class, with 2 headed out the door in Jeremiah Hunter and Giles Jackson. And yeah, there are a bunch of really talented young players behind them, but you want to sell that early playing time. You want to make sure you can stack classes and just keep bringing talented guys in the door, because I like Audric Harris. I like Jason Robinson. I like Justice Williams. But if you can add an Andrew Marsh, a Chris Lawson, a Phillip Bell, a Braden Vinesbright, or a Cooper Perry, just add 3 of those guys right there, and all of a sudden you've reloaded and are turning into one of the best wide receiver rooms in the Big Ten. And with that being said, one really highly rated guy that certainly deserves a lot of recognition is interior offensive lineman Champ Tualealea, where he set 2 visits, USC and Washington. This is a guy who's top 200 nationally, according to 247 Sports, top 15 interior offensive lineman in the country. I know everybody's always saying, all right, what's happening on the offensive line? What's happening on the offensive line? It looks like the 2 biggest targets right now along the interior, or just at least what I'm really curious about, because Champ Tualealea definitely has the interior profile, would be take Peter Lange, take Champ Tualealea, kind of work with what you can there, because you already have Jake Flores, who's definitely excellent. John Mills definitely profiles as a tackle, in my opinion, where the offensive line has really shaped up where those seem to be the top 4 targets. And obviously, right, they're the 4 guys that have scheduled official visits to Washington, including Flores, who's already committed. So when I look at those 4 guys, I really like Lange. I wrote about him a little bit over on Huskies Wire a couple of weeks ago, that he profiles exactly like Jonas Avellana down in Arizona, who Brennan Carroll was able to turn into a freshman All-American, according PFF, I believe it was. And they were able to do really, really good things with him, where he's that same profile, 6'5", 330. He's listed as an interior lineman right now, but if you want that guy to play tackle, have Jake Flores on the interior, it all works out there really well. And if you're able to go get a couple of these big 4-star linemen on the West Coast, that's a big win for this coaching staff.
Right, and again, it's a similar thing we talked about Andrew Marsh, where again, look at the other visits he's looking at USC. You know, again, then you have Arizona State, but you got offers from Auburn. So it's clearly a guy that it's not just a 4-star in title, right? It's a guy that clearly other schools have identified as well. And I think, obviously, one thing that we kind of harped on early on was the lack of interior bodies on the offensive line of the West Coast, but the few that are now interested in Washington. So I think that's kind of something to consider, where you still don't want to abandon. It's more so on the defensive line, but on the offensive line, there's some decent bodies on the offensive line. Obviously, you know, Jake, but there's a very few cream of the crop. But I think Champ would be kind of one of those guys where if he continues to mold through his senior year and solidify his 4-star ranking, because again, to your point, he's kind of fringe 200 right now. If he can get into that 150 range and truly kind of solidify himself as a 4-star, I think to me, those are 2 guys where when you start thinking about, again, the projectability, right? It's what coaches use all the time. Where do these guys project to? No doubt Champ projects more as an interior guy, but as they build out the class, you now have a guy that can play tackle or guard, another one that can play tackle or guard. So the more you have versatility in that, the more kind of range you have, especially with the offensive line still being pretty well in flux, because there might be more scholarship opening for the 25 class after the season, right? So there's plenty of ways in which this class can grow out. And so getting these guys on campus early, I think, is a massive win, because they might not commit early, but getting them on campus early, and then if they need to come back in the fall for a visit or do anything like that, you at least have that solid foundation in the offseason where, hey, I spent 48 hours with these guys just learning football, learning Seattle. Now if I go for a game, I can kind of just focus on the game and not worry about how am I going to fit or what's the vibe like.
Absolutely. And Lars, with that being said, these aren't the only guys that set visits, and it's the only 4-star guys even who set visits, because it seems like Washington's starting to get hot on the recruiting trail. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at GameTime, because shout out to GameTime, man, because GameTime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down, and the closer it gets to first pitch, and shout out to them for that, because, I spent all weekend at T-Mobile Park watching the Seattle Mariners take on my Boston Red Sox, and I won't get into how frustrating the Saturday's game especially was. I'm sure most of our everydayers agree with that statement, but, that's more of a me thing than it is anything else. But hey, shout out to GameTime for getting me there. I really appreciate it. Some of their awesome things are their last minute deals, because you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Their all-in prices are so cool. When you toggle that feature, it shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. And you get their lowest price guarantee with everything. And if you find a lower price, GameTime will credit you with 110% of the difference. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets at GameTime. You can download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. And before we move on, when we talk recruiting, we got to talk about our good friends over at LinkedIn, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free, just like the Huskies found the right professionals in athletic director Pat Chun and basketball coach Danny Sprinkle. And it seems like those guys are really here to take the programs in the right direction. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that the small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. That's why you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, Lars, one guy that we need to talk about, because there are 2 other guys that we didn't mention that are 4-star recruits that are a little bit lower down in the rankings, but definitely are very interested in Washington. I want to start with Christian Thatcher, 4-star linebacker out of Arborview in Nevada. He's somebody I got to talk to a lot the other day. And one of the first things that he told me was that he actually almost committed to Jedd Fisch and their staff in Arizona, because he likes the relationship so much. He likes everything about how he treats his people, treats his coaching staff, and just said that, the Washington offer came a little bit late, but it came from these guys. I really like Robert Bala. I really like Aaron Van Horn, one of the GAs who's really close with the linebackers and works with them really well. And then he also, one of the really interesting things that he told me was he really liked talking to Steve Belichick. And a couple weeks ago, you and I were on this show, and we were speculating that his first call was probably to Matai Tagoai, top 100 kid, where he talked about playing linebacker or safety in his interview on Chris Lawson's podcast. But Christian Thatcher was like, no, his first call, and I'm pretty sure it was to me, where he was like, yeah, he was really fun. And he's just, Lars, you and I got to experience him the other day at a coach's luncheon. And he's just a really funny guy, where he had the line about, oh yeah, I have a job, my dad doesn't. And he's like, yeah, no, I really enjoyed building a relationship with him. And it's something where that was our biggest question about Steve Belichick, was, can he recruit? Can he figure out a way to do that, to relate to these kids? And he said it himself. He said, yeah, it's still a little weird. I'm still, in a bit of a feeling out process with it, but it sounds like he's already having a positive impact on the recruiting trail. And Christian Thatcher spoke very highly of Jedd Fisch, his coaching staff, and Washington as a whole. And I'm going to quote him here. He said, Washington is really, 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 really high on his list. So it seems like they're starting to get hot with some of these 4-star recruits.
Yeah, and I think it was only a matter of time, right? Because you make the hires in about January, February. They kind of get acclimated February, March, and then by the end of March, you're thinking, okay, these guys, when can we start to see Steve Belichick's recruiting prowess even slightly develop? And I think, honestly, the way that Christian Thatcher described his call with Steve Belichick is honestly what I like to hear, where Steve Belichick's not being fake. He's not being disingenuous. He's not going to pretend to be somebody he's not. I think that's something we both picked up. We probably already knew that, just kind of hearing the vibes coming out of New England. But when you kind of sit down with him, hear him talk, he's like, look, I'm a very simple guy. I came here to coach football. I came here to, develop players and things like that come with it. So it's not to say that I'm just coaching football and I'm not playing any role in recruiting, but it's also like, well, I can't talk a lot about recruiting. So the only thing I can say is, yeah, it's weird to call high school kids. Like, yeah, I mean, it would be kind of weird if he didn't say that, right? It's like, yeah, it's something new, but it's also, I mean, I still know I have to do it. It's still a way to kind of create relationships and things like that. So I think honestly, it's just the timing, right? Where we knew Steve Belichick's recruit, the name Belichick is going to carry some weight, right? But then you can have a great last name, but if you can't build relationships and you can't cultivate relationships and kids can't feel comfortable talking with you, and let's say you need 3 or 4 other assistant coaches to kind of recruit kids for you, and then they just arrive on campus and you coach them. That's not the case with Steve Belichick. And so I do like his personality coming through, no matter what people might think of it, right? Because I mean, to most people, he's not going to be the rah guy. He's going to be the, why didn't you execute it this way? Come on, man. It's this simple. He'll get the head flip and the mullet's going to start flowing. Or the ponytail is going to flip forward a couple of times. And he's just going to do one of these things. And then when a kid finally does it right, we're going to get the tongue action where he's going to be like, yeah. And that's just who Stick is.
No, you're right. I want to see some kind of over under just on how many times we're going to just see that face on camera this year. That'd be a lot of fun. But no, you're right. And that's one of the fun things about just this whole hire in general, where it's certainly a home run hire in terms of scheme, in terms of what it could look like on the field. But it was one of the first things we talked about, where I talked with some of my sources out in Boston about his time with the Patriots and about just some of the things like that. And they said, yeah, the biggest question that we have is he going to be able to communicate and recruit and do those sort of things effectively? Or that's going to be really tough. And it seems like, maybe some part of it is kind of having his own leg to stand on, where it's not just a little bit of, okay, yeah, like, your dad's the head coach and that kind of is what it is. Being able to make a name for himself and do all these other things are all great for him. And I really like where that's all going. And that's going to be really important on the recruiting trail too, because you can certainly sell the Belichick name. You can sell those kinds of things and say, yeah, look at what we do on film. I think this is going to work for you really well. But it goes so far beyond that in recruiting, where so much of it is building relationships and doing things like that, where that's going to be just as important in terms of earning commitments and those things with different kids. So Christian Thatcher being one of them, where he's just emphasized relationships as far and away his top priority when it comes to a coaching staff, which seems to be one of the reasons he really likes what Jedd Fisch and them are doing. And just another guy in that same vein who seems to be really high on Washington is another 4-star tight end, and that's Vander Ploog, where you and I have talked at length about adding multiple tight ends in this class. And he's another guy who has set an official visit to Washington. It looks like he's going to be up here for the spring game with Champ Tualealea. A couple other guys are coming that same weekend. And he's another one where I really like his film. I think he's a really projectable athlete. And he's somebody where he's a little bit on the lower end of like the 4-star scale, but getting him, he's a 4-star take. He's, like I said, a really nice athlete. He's somebody who Jordan Paopao would absolutely be able to work with and would add so much depth to the tight end room that I really like where they're going with that.
Right. I mean, I think that's kind of the key with this tight end class, right? Where you look at it and you say, okay, they're going to certainly take more than one, but then we talked about this multiple times. What type of body are you taking? Are you taking a split out? Are you taking a versatile one? My favorite example is your sample, because that's one that Jordan Paopao recruited, was the guy that he developed, and one that, again, Vander Ploog doesn't have that same sort of body type, but it's okay. He's probably more your split out tight end, at least from just look at the body 6'6", 210. That just tells me, okay, he can probably be a decent blocker, but I imagine he's a better pass catcher at this point. I think he would probably agree with that. But what's one thing Jordan Paopao traditionally has done with all of his tight ends? He will find a way. I was going to say, he will find a way, whether you see the field or not. He will find a way to teach you how to block, and then you'll see the field, and then you'll flourish. Because in Jedd Fisch's offense, it's in the same type of role, right? Where, yeah, no doubt, you have Tanner McLaurin, one of the top 2 tight ends in the Pac-12 in terms of receiving yards and touchdowns. But you also still have to be able to block. And in order for Tanner to succeed in his pass catching, you need to have multiple tight ends who can block. So you have 3 tight end sets. Tanner's getting all the credit, but you have to have those other 2 willing blockers in order to have that third key success.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's something where I don't know how many 3 tight end sets we're going to see here at Washington, just kind of with this offense and with all these other things. And also right now there are 4 scholarship tight ends. So, that would certainly be a little bit interesting. But one other guy that we need to hit on really, really quickly is very recently Notre Dame 247 insider Tom Loy put in a crystal ball for Zaydrius Rainey-Sale to Washington. We've gotten a lot of comments about ZRS in just from our everydayers on some of our videos where we talk recruiting. And it felt like things had certainly fell silent to an extent on the Washington front where, the coaching change definitely was tough. And he had a great relationship with William Inge, where that was certainly like his guy. And that's why it felt like Alabama for a while there was in the lead. And then Inge goes to Tennessee, and you and I kind of hinted at, Tennessee is certainly going to be in the mix because of that. And we'll see if anything's imminent in terms of Zaydrius Rainey-Sale deciding to recommit to this coaching staff. But just real quickly, if they are able to get him, that would be just an absolutely massive win for Washington.
Yeah, I mean, that's the easiest take in the world, right? Because you can still take a Christian Thatcher. Because again, that does not impact the other guys we just talked about. Christian Thatcher could easily come because you still probably need 2 or 3 linebackers in this class, right?
Definitely.
And by the way,
3 in my opinion, yeah.
I'm just saying 2, no doubt, 3 more than likely. But I'm just saying, without question, you're taking at least 2. That does not change anything in terms of the type of player they take or who they're looking at. And with the versatility in Steve Belichick's defense, you can take 3, 4, and make one of them safety. Doesn't even matter.
Sure, yeah, that's the Tagoa thing where he would certainly look nice as a safety. That would be something that you can just play with there a little bit in terms of just how his body fills out and a whole bunch of different things along those lines. But it's exactly what you said, where you can take a ZRS, you can take Mark Hennecourt from Narbonne High School, and you can take Christian Thatcher, and there you go. There's your 3 linebackers, and you can still take Batai Tagoa, have him play that rover role, play a little bit of linebacker, play a little bit of safety. Where exactly there are so many ways to make it work. It's just about getting the bodies through the door. And right now, that's the most important thing, where obviously this coaching staff has talked at length about wanting to find a way to get a top 15 class, that they understand how important that is. And that was one of the things Christian Thatcher told me. He said, I was really impressed with everything they're doing in Arizona. And it feels like they have so much more room to do what they want at Washington that I'm really excited to see where this goes. So with that being said, we're going to switch gears a little bit because I kind of left some everydayers on it with a little bit of a cliffhanger on Friday, and we need to write that. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Fire TV, because Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis and more. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV, and it provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV, because Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes all of us here over at Locked On, as well as most of the big pro and college conferences as well. Fire TV lets you dive into all the in-game analysis, highlights, and so much more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, from March Madness to the NBA, the MLB, and lots more, not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. You can check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels yet, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. So, Lars, the very last thing I said on Friday was certainly an annoying cliffhanger for some of our everydayers. And that's my bad, where I said Troy Fautanu could end up as a top 10 pick, giving Washington 2 probable top 10 picks. And I was talking to some sources who said that they feel very, very strongly that if Troy Fautanu is on the board for the New York Jets at number 10, that they would have a very, very hard time passing on him. Where right now they have Tyron Smith at left tackle. They've definitely solidified their offensive line in a couple of spots. They've got Elijah Vera Tucker. They've got a whole lot of talented players up front. But after signing Tyron Smith, who's definitely getting old and certainly somewhat injury prone at this point in his career, they're looking for a long-term answer. And you could plug Troy in anywhere along the offensive line and just find ways to make it work in year one. And obviously they have very high aspirations this year with Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles. They kind of thought that they could make a playoff run last year. That didn't happen. Of course, 4 plays into the year, everything happens the way that it does. And I just think that he would be a really great fit for this offensive line. And, I really do want to get into the specifics of Washington having 2 top 10 picks. We'll probably save that more for another show because I just think this is a really fun fit in terms of, just what this could be for Troy in terms of just his rise in general is one thing that I think is really cool to see where, you and I were pushing for him as, hey, this is a guy who should find his way into the first round. Probably going to be, somewhere between 16 and 32. And then the more he's risen, it seems like some scouts like him over Olu Fashanu at Penn State at this point.
Right. Well, I think the reason why more and more people have become fond of Troy is because you mentioned it exactly, his versatility, right? Where he can start out as a guard and then go to a tackle 3, 4, 5 years down the line, or he can just be an all-pro guard for his entire career. I mean, again, you don't normally spend a top 10 pick on a guard, but when you're the New York Jets, you really are a Super Bowl. I'm not going to say you're Super Bowl cowboy, but like you have Aaron Rodgers, you have a chance, right? What's the best?
And they've got a great defense. They got some good skill players now. Yeah.
And I was going to say, because the only other caveat would have been, don't you think Aaron Rodgers could use a receiver? It's like, well, if Aaron Rodgers has one more year left and you're the Jets, what's one position you're going to do that you mentioned the Jim Harbaugh quote or somebody, Jedd Fisch also mentioned the Jim Harbaugh quote where the offensive line is the one group that doesn't rely on anybody else. The quarterback relies on him. The receivers rely on him. So if you're the Jets and you're thinking, okay, we got Vera Tucker, but to your point, if Smith goes down, Troy can just plug and play, kick over from guard to tackle or stay at guard and play a couple of years at guard and then be your franchise left tackle. So I think with or without Aaron Rodgers there, Troy Fautanu just makes so much sense for their, to your point, long-term projectability along the offensive line where whether you start as a guard or tackle, ideally you're spending first-round picks, early top 10 picks to get a tackle. But if you need to plug him in at guard because you have Tyron Smith, okay, that's fine. Because, again, it's not a wasted pick. It's just guaranteeing Aaron Rodgers will be protected up until freak accidents happen.
Right. So you're right. Where the Tyron Smith thing does throw a little bit of a wrench into this, where you're right. They absolutely could still take him, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do at this point in time. But when you look at it, it's Tyron Smith is a 1-year stopgap at this point. With the way his contract works out, it's like a 1-year, $6 million deal that's incentive laden. If he plays basically all of the snaps this year, it goes up as high as $20 million. That'd be great. He can find a way to make that work because if you're getting that many snaps out of Tyron Smith, he's going to be playing at a Hall of Fame, all-pro caliber just season. Like that's what you're going to get. But if not, and in the unfortunately likely scenario that he doesn't, you are already stockpiling for the future, where that's what Troy is, where I wouldn't be surprised if this is his last season no matter what, and for Tyron Smith. And Aaron Rodgers as well. So you want to make sure that he's as well protected as possible. And the Jets have really been trying to put together a top-tier offensive line, where Joe Douglas is trying to save his job. So, wouldn't be surprised if, there's a chance they go out and they make a flashy pick and they go do all those other things. But Troy's, I really appreciated when, it's very hard to just get a read on arm length before official measurements come out from time to time, unless it's your Joey Porter Jr. arms or touching your kneecaps at any point in time. But it was really nice to just kind of see just the tape kind of be backed up by, oh wait, no, yeah, this guy does have long enough arms to play tackle. And he's the most athletic offensive lineman in the draft. So it's cool to see all those things come together for Troy. And then on top of that, it's just this rise in general where this is a really, really good offensive line class. And we've started to talk about Roger Rosengarten potentially finding his way in the back end of the first round. There could be 7, 8, 9 offensive linemen taken in the first round. And it felt like Troy was going to be one of them. But if he's the second guy off the board, that would be an insane rise for him. And honestly, well-deserved in my opinion.
Right. I mean, because you'd have to imagine, again, a lot of people, even though you mentioned Joe Alt is kind of like the quintessential offensive line pick in this class, right? So you can understand.
Yeah, Joe Alt be gone by like 5 or 6.
That's no slight to Troy for going second to Joe Alt, but it's almost to your point, a testament to Troy because nobody was, I mean, we were obviously, but there wasn't the national consensus that Troy Fautanu was a top 16 pick, right, or even a first round pick. I mean, I think by the end of the season he was a first round pick, but he was going in the 25 to 20 range, and it's like, why? I mean, again, Joe Alt is the quintessential tackle, but Troy Fautanu is the quintessential offensive lineman. And I think there's a difference there, right? No doubt, Joe Alt is probably the better tackle, but Troy Fautanu might have the longer career and play more snaps early on in his career because he's playing so many different positions, right? He can play right or left guard. He can play tackle.
I disagree with that to an extent, because when I watch Joe Alt, that is just one of those dudes who's going to be a stalwart left tackle for like the next 10 years. I don't make this comparison lightly, where I look at him and it's just like, oh yeah, that's Andrew Whitworth, and that dude just plays forever. Like I can certainly see a world where that happens, but it's no slight to Troy, because that's just the kind of player that he's up against. Where when you look at Olu Fashanu, that's a dude where he's still 21 years old. And he has such a high ceiling. He's really, really impressive in a lot of areas. And then I look at Troy, and you look at the athleticism, because you're right. Like Troy's going to be somebody who can start from day one. I just didn't want to make sure that it's, because Joe Alt certainly still has that's those same qualities where, like, I don't think he falls past the Titans at 7, where if he's still on the board at 7, the Titans are just be like, yeah, we're going to just draft this dude and he's going to just stand at left tackle for as long as he's able to physically stand. Like that's just how long they're going to make sure he's around in that program. And Troy Fautanu can probably do more in terms of position than Joe Alt, where I don't think Joe Alt can play guard. And there are certainly their strengths, but Joe Alt is certainly still a superior prospect, but Troy is not worlds behind him. Like it was kind of thought of in late December, early January when this process first started. And that's a really impressive rise for him, just that we can even talk about him in this same sort of discussion.
To your point, Joe Alt is Joe Thomas from the 2007 draft.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Troy Fautanu is a combination of Joe Staley and Ben Grubb, who went later in the first round, but he's better. Okay. So Troy Fautanu is a better version of what both those, because he can play tackle or guard. That's why I say
Joe Staley is a good one too.
Right, they're both, but I think Troy Fautanu is a little bit, because again, I don't think, to your point, he's not worlds. There's not a massive gulf, right? But there is enough of a gulf where it's like, again, if Troy goes in the top 10, top 12, Ben Grubb and Joe Staley were kind of a little bit lower in that pecking order. So I think Troy's better than both of them. But those are the comps that we give, right? Where Troy's a better Ben Grubb, he's a better Joe Staley, just because there's more versatility. But Joe Alt is that Joe Thomas, all pro. He's whether he goes to a playoff game or not, he's the guy that's just there.
Right. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your continued support. Please make sure you stay tuned, because we've got so much fun stuff planned for spring practice. Like we said, that starts on Wednesday. We hope to see some of you out there, since they are all open practice. So if you see us, come up, say hi. We'll chat football, whatever you want. We'll be around. And until that happens, make sure you stay subscribed wherever you get your podcast. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you hit that subscribe button and click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. Make sure to like the video. Leave us a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns. If you're an audio-only listener, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Tuesday.